Right, okay. I suspect that we are live now after 2.5 minutes of fanning about. This is a live stream which has got the wrong title up now. I just did a title about the Second Temple of Jerusalem, and I've been blogging the last few days about a broad sweep of history of the Judeo-Christian tradition that we are live now
Since
after 2.5 minutes of fanning about.
the year zero.
This is a live stream
which is generally in Christianity
the wrong title
the year
up
that
now. I
Jesus
just
was
did
born.
a
But it also
title about the
coincides
Second
with
Temple of
the
Jerusalem.
building of the second
and I've been
temple,
blogging
or
the
the
last
second
few
temple
days about a broad
extension, to be more
sweep of
precise,
history.
leading
Right,
to the
okay.
destruction
I
of the temple
suspect
tradition in
that we are
around
live
60
now,
AD,
whatever
the
it
year
was.
zero, by the
This
Romans,
is a live
in
stream,
response
which
to the
is
Jewish
generally.
revolt. So that's what we're going to actually concentrate on today.
I just did a
But it also coincides with the building was going on there and what it was all about, what's going on today, and what that's all about. Extension, be more precise.
So I've just turned off the speaker so that doesn't sort of double stream. Anyway, for me, this story all begins with a blog I did back in January 2016 on the iron law of oligarchy. I've been doing quite a lot of serious reading and monetary history research since 2011 when I started this blog, which used to be called Let Them Confect Sweeter Lies, Muso Musings, which was on Blogger, and I transferred it across to WordPress in September 2018, which was a kind of an act of self-censorship and vandalism, because I was trying to get a job in London in my old profession, and I didn't think that actually pointing out that we lived in an oligarchy which was hugely financialised, centralised, and also a wealth funnel from the poorest in society to the richest in society. That's not the best way of advancing one's career. So, but putting that all to one side, it certainly makes for very good storylines for novels, and I've been writing a novel for the past few years called The Conquest of Dough, which deals with the broad spread of history from prehistory through to sedentary societies, so that's for the first sort of 5,000 years up to zero, and then from then to now, and that is a huge amount of time, and to get a handle on those sorts of time periods, you start looking for archetypes, or you start looking for prototypes. Now, Umberto Eco wrote an essay called Ur, Your, which is a big U, little r, which is a prefix denoting the root of, or the essence of, and you are fascism was looking at the sorts of things that appear in fascist societies, which is kind of relevant to where we're headed with this now. But this blog that I did on the iron law of oligarchy, take a look at it. I'm going to put links in the description and add further links. I will now go to the next window here. Here's the blog here, and it's actually was in response to a article that Chris Hedges did, The Illusion of Freedom. And again, these are themes which crop up when you're talking about a large mass of people who are answerable to a ruling class. And this is what we're going to see in a minute when we actually look at the Second Temple, particularly the story of Jesus throwing the moneylenders out of the temple. There's a quote at the beginning of this, which is from Paulo Freire, which says, where are we? We must seize the splendid opportunity to get to meet with them, talk with them, win their trust, hopefully win them over. That's what someone was saying about Chris Hedges regarding the people who he felt were suffering this illusion. Really. And Paulo Freire said this: the more radical the person is, the more fully he or she enters into reality, so that knowing it better, he or she can transform it. This individual is not afraid to confront, to listen to see the world unveiled. This person is not afraid to meet the people or to enter into a dialogue with them. This person does not consider himself or herself the proprietor of history or of all people or the liberator of the oppressed, but he or she does commit himself or herself within history to fight at their side. So that's from Paulo Freire's classic book. I think it was published, I'm not sure if it's in the late 60s or 70s, but Pedagogy of the Oppressed it's called. So with that sort of idea of not being proprietaries of history, but just taking a look at it, both in terms of a biblical narrative, a Toranic or Pentateuch, which is the first 5 books of the Bible, and the Jewish Torah, which grew out of an oral tradition, which is important, and then also the Quran, and then also consider the New Testament. And history through that lens, and then history through the lens of other documentation. Just a note on documentation. Earliest records that we have, and writing, cuneiform texts and all the rest of it, is about measuring things and keeping stock taking, keeping stock of what resources are available and how they're distributed. I just make that point now, because that will keep cropping up. And so then this is another blog later on. This is from May last year. Who rules, oligarchy and all that political malarkey? And this points at a couple of interesting sources. ISGP Studies, which is a deep politics study site. This site here, which is Dornoff's site. He's a professor who has studied the US oligarchy particularly. In fact, he wrote a book about Bohemian Grove back in the 1970s, and I found this guy. I noticed his book on Bohemian Grove on a bookshelf behind the then YouTuber, now BitShooter, a guy called Mark Dice, who's one of the people that the mainstream media like to demonise. But it was Mark Dice had this book about written by this guy that caused me to find this chap, and WikiSpooks, which is a blog on deep politics, and so it goes on into Edmund Burke, who I'm very fond of quoting from his speech to Parliament, these present discontents, and so it goes on. The link will be in, and so I mean, do look at these things, because although this is about the extension of the Second Temple, King Herod and Jesus and the moneylenders, the themes interlock, and religion, politics, geopolitics, economics in the sense of domestic economics, that is domestic economics of governments, international relations, and trade between people who know each other and people who don't know each other are all very, very important to this idea. And then the other idea in all of this, and from the Bible, is the Tower of Babel, and the idea of how nations emerge in different languages and what have you, which is a kind of an archetypal sort of a myth. But what we're concerning ourselves here is how modern the rule of Herod in Judea actually was, as compared to even modern day Israel and Benjamin Netanyahu, for instance. And the parallels are not religious, the parallels are political and monetary, and we'll come to that. And so then we come to some of the philosophical and religious stuff, and a narrative running through disputes in Britain at the moment about freedom of speech, about race, about religion, about civic duty, civil obedience, civil disobedience, but also state overreach, censorship, and so forth. And I put this blog up on my Steemit blog, Speaker's Corner, Dialogue, a messy and loud process. Justice, what love looks like in public. Now, Cornel West is probably my favourite living philosopher, and he's a professor of divinity and just the most amazing speaker and the most profound thinker for me. This is a talk, it's a radio talk about justice is what love looks like in public, and Professor West has a number of kind of catchphrases that he often says. In fact, his dialogue on love with the anarchist writer from the New School in New York, whose name is temporarily misplaced, and I'll put the link in the description, is really worth looking at. And also Professor West has a role in the film The Examined Life, and I actually made a track of that where I put his dialogue and wrote a funky tune, which is called Bluesman in the Life of the Mind. But I digress. So anyway, this is the live cast that Tommy Robinson did from outside Leeds Court, and then this blog is a discussion I had with a friend of mine about this, and I'd been and was inspired to look into a lot of the discussions at Speaker's Corner, which I found interesting because I've been very interested as the two live streams I put up yesterday on BitChute and YouTube, which I recorded last summer when I was looking through a number of these dialogues that have been taking place in Speaker's Corner in Hyde Park. Speaker's Corner, for those of you that don't know, is in London, and it's at the end of Oxford Street that joins up with Hyde Park. It's traditionally where people have been allowed to stand up and say their bit. People used to get executed or hung there, and it's got something to do with your last words or whatever that you. But anyway, there's this tradition of free speech, and there are lots of these discussions. I've watched quite a few of them, and this chap here is Ali Dawa. This is on his YouTube video, and this is his long discussion with Tommy Robinson. That's Tommy's cousin there, and this is Lawrence Southern, who's a Canadian blogger, and a discussion between Ali and her, and Mike, my friend, was brought up a Catholic and is very interested in both Freemasonry, Catholic Church, the Jesuits, the abuse of the. I mentioned Umberto Eco earlier. He actually wrote a book called The Name of the Rose, which is about overreach of the Catholic Church, and which was made into a really, really good film with Sean Connery in it. Well worth watching. The Name of the Rose by Umberto Eco, is a famous philosopher and linguist. And I mentioned his essay "You Are Fascism" earlier. He was an Italian. So have a look at this. I really like this guy. He's an American pastor. I mean, I like this guy too. I watched so many of the discussions between everybody. I mean, I like Tommy too. I mean, maybe I like everybody. Maybe I'm naive. I'm not trying to please everybody. I mean, I think if you look for the good in people, and you know, try to understand and build from someone else's perspectives, that's the way to sort of alight upon some sort of approximation of the truth, and that, in some respects, that's what this video is about. This is not a video about religion, and it's not a video trying to convert anybody to religion. I mean, that's none of my business. And as Respect, this guy here, says in this video, you know, a person's religion is between them and their God. You know, any intercedent coming in claiming to is basically, you know, it's a cheek, and it's offensive too. The notion of, you know, one God, whatever one conceives that to be. There's a poem called Desiderata, and that's one of the lines in it. You know, your God, or whatever you know, whatever it is that floats your boat. So anyway, that's that. I promised to put those up in the blog that I did yesterday. Here they are: Orthodoxy, True Torah Jesus, Abraham to the Second Temple, and then Orthodoxy, True Torah Jesus, Muhammad's succession, the companions, and Aisha, Jesus, Paul to Nicaea. That's referring to the Nicene Creed and the Council of Nicaea, which kind of came at the culmination of an argument, a long-running argument between various bishops of Rome, but particularly between Saint Augustine and Pelagius. And there's something called the Pelagian heresy, and there's something called the Arian heresy, and they're about two things. They're about free will over determinism, and the other thing that they get into is about transubstantiation, and that's about the idea of the Holy Trinity, and about, you know, how can Jesus be God and man, and all of that stuff. Now, I mean, they argued about that forever, and it's still argued about now. That's not what this video is about. This video is about the power structures of the church, the hierarchy of the church, how the church interacts with the state, how the Jewish church interacted with the Roman state, and how Herod was a vassal king, answerable to Rome, who didn't even have his own money. They actually used the Tyrian. Tyre is in Syria, and they used to have a mint at Tyre, and there is some question as to whether or not the money that was used in Judea was minted at Tyre or minted locally, and the silver, which there wasn't much of there because it was a very, very poor part of the world, and they had really, really small sort of copper stroke bronze coinage, which is another kind of technical discussion we don't need to get into. But the really important point is that, you know, whose king was Herod exactly? You know, like King David was the king of the Jews, coming out of the Abrahamic tradition, Abraham through Isaac down to Joseph, etc. But Herod, you know, who the hell was Herod? Where did he come from? And what was his claim? And then, of course, you have Jesus, and Jesus's claim to be the King of the Jews and the Son of God. Now, put the religious side of that all together, but take the context of an occupying force, the Romans, their vassal king. I mean, there's a parallel to this in Venezuela at the moment. Is Guaido like a Herod being planted into Venezuela, whereby Maduro, is he kind of like the guy on the ground that the Romans are trying to get rid of? I mean, the parallels are, I mean, you can probably think of lots yourself. But there we are. That's that. I mean, Syria, obviously, that's another one, which is quite pertinent. You know, Tyre is still a place in Syria. But anyway, let's go on and see what else we've got. Cornell West, the Speaker's Corner debate. I mean, you can do your own searches on Speaker's Corner, so I'm going to close some of these things as I go. This is my track, Blues Man, The Life of the Mind. Cornell West. I'll keep that for the link later. This is a YouTube channel. And where are we now? What have we got here? Okay, so with the blog that I did earlier today, I started off with this article, and this article is talking about how the private equity side of things, or what we call hedge funds, are really just conduits through which money from the big banks is put into the general economy, and it's not money they have in the first place, and acts as a way of them of getting wealth off out of the hands of other people. And that's what this article actually does describe. I'm not going to go into the argument for that or how that all works. I'm happy to engage in any discussion in the comments on that point. But my placeholder for now, my contention is that sort of thing, which is going on in New York, it's going on across the world. I mean, I argue that it's what Uber is doing. It's trying to monopolise an industry that's traditionally been fragmented. I argue that it's what Bezos has done with Amazon in a very, very big way. But it's also what we see happening in media. The idea of patronage is very, very strong in the type of capitalism that's practiced at the moment in the Washington Consensus and the oligarchy. So that article is an amazing article by these two independent writers. I mean, they may have moved on since now. I found this again today when I was looking to do this video. I was so delighted because I hunted high and low for it a couple of weeks back and I couldn't find it, but happily I've been reunited with it, because it is when you do the amount of research that I have done for my novel, and I've got in excess of 1 million words of research, and the draft is something like 300,000 words, and I'm trying to edit it down to a 50,000 word novel. So keeping all of this stuff indexed and all the rest of it is not a trivial task, and some things you remember, but you can't find yourself. And so anyway, I was very pleased to rediscover this source. Now that's just me writing this one novel. You can imagine over the whole slew of history, you know, there's a lot of stuff going on here. So there's lots of opportunities for trying to create false narratives or trying to make suggestions in a certain direction in a not altogether honest way, and that's another thing that we will come across in our sort of inquiries into this. At the top of my page there are lots of open tags, and we're actually less than an eighth of the way through them, I think.
Today's headline that's gone all around the world says that Tommy Robinson says he doesn't care.
Okay, so on dishonest narratives, this video is from September 2018, and Sky News, and a Sky News interview which was very dishonestly presented or misrepresenting Tommy Robinson, Stephen Lennon's point of view. Now, it is an important part of all of this in terms of divide and rule, divide and conquer, and so I will put the description in the blog for this so people can go and look at this. It's on Tommy Robinson's video YouTube channel, you can see here. So what I'll probably do is actually download that one and re-upload it, because it's the last mainstream social media platform which Tommy Robinson's allowed to be on. I'm totally against censorship, completely and utterly against censorship. I totally deplore what's been done to this man, who I think is a genuine and nice guy. I mean, you know, there's lots of stuff he says I don't agree with, but there's stuff that I see here. Look, his speech to the Oxford Union. I mean, if you haven't watched that, you should watch it. It's very, very, very powerful, and you know, he has a point. So anyway, so that's that. Now the antithesis, if you like. Oh no, that's not that one. That's coming later. This is the underground history of American education, and I uploaded a video of this with John Taylor Gatto, and this is also relevant in terms of government, and when we get to the Second Temple stuff. So that's that. This one here, this is relevant. The first time I came across Francis Turner, or L'Ombre de l'Olivier, he used to have another blog, and he's a computer guy who was instrumental and very, very, very informative to me in my early inquiries into climate modelling, and he did a lot of work on the ClimateGate emails, and he's on this Liberty Me site now. Jeffrey Tucker is the guy behind this. He's quite a famous guy in the cryptocurrency and libertarian sort of world, but it's a really good blog. But this is a really interesting blog about Twitter and censorship, and you know, that this sort of thing, you know, if any of the following apply to you, please delete your Twitter account so that it can be a safe environment for all. I mean, this, you know, I'm a straight white male, middle class male, and all the rest of it, and you know, I mean, I don't dispute the right for them to say that. I don't think it's a joke, and all the rest of it. That I don't think they're making it as a joke. Maybe it is a joke, I don't know. But however offended I may be, there's no right not to be offended and all the rest of it, and I just think that's idiotic, and I'm quite happy to have that discussion with anybody. It doesn't stand up, but if this person wants to make this, it doesn't bother me in the slightest. So there you go. Then we come to this, Of Two Minds, Charles Hugh Smith. This is about the debt serfs in the European Union, neo-feudal kleptocracy. Okay, that's relevant because that's effectively what Herod was running. And then another one, neo-feudalism and neo-colonial financialization model. Again, you know, right back at you, back to the Romans in, you know, fin de siècle sort of .0 Herod, etc. Judea. So that's that there. Then this is interesting. This kind of brings it forward again. Now this is the New Citizen, which is a paper published by an Australian political party who are considered to be far right and all the rest of it, and they are actually calling out British Crown created green fascism. And where do you start? There's a very, very good book about the British persecution and basically genocide of the Aboriginal people of Tasmania. Very, very good book, you know, novel it is. I'll put the link in the description. I can't remember. I read that novel probably about 15, maybe even 20 years ago. I may have a copy of it somewhere still in the house. I don't know, but I'll be able to find one online. But the attitudes, you know, like Prince Philip wanting to come back as a virus, the World Wildlife Fund, it's a leap to make. But when you start looking at Aldous Huxley, and you start looking at the eugenics movement, and you start looking at Galton and Darwin and all of that stuff, and today's Green Party, the Extinction Rebellion, and all the rest of it, one of the themes we come to later is the idea of power or money. And there are people for the power and people for the money, and these people are the people for the power who believe that they know best, and they, you know, they are authoritarian. I mean, they are hypocrites. I mean, I can't stress that too much. I mean, I'm an environmentalist. I don't like pollution. I don't drop litter, I pick up litter. I mean, I'm also a smoker, and I'm absolutely, you know, I never stub out my cigarettes on the ground or anything like that. I keep them until I can put them in an ashtray or a dustbin properly. Now, the point is that these people are very much do as I say and not as I do, and that's the theme of vassal kings. Now, another thing that I want to develop is the idea of the divine right of kings, and also the idea of my country right and wrong. I mean, both are incorrect ideas regarding where those concepts come from, because the concept is that of kingship is that it's the Greek concept of arete, which is basically virtue, and virtuous rulers that put the general kingdom ahead of their own personal interests. And that is a concept which is sorely missing in modern political economy, political leadership, industrial leadership. Greed is good, might is right, and you know, Gordon Gekko has become, you know, by some tokens, the President of the United States. I mean, I think that's Donald Trump is probably more virtuous in many respects, in my view, certainly than President Clinton was. Certainly than the Bush presidencies, and also in my view than President Obama, which may surprise a lot of people. But I mean, Trump is accused of being a fascist, and I'm not quite sure whether he is or not. He may actually turn out to be an old-fashioned conservative, a libertarian conservative as well. Whereas I think the jury has been out, deliberated, and come back, and unanimously shown that Obama was an actual fascist. Again, then you come to the point about fascism and Nazism and conflating the two, which is an oft sort of repeated trope, if you like. Anyway, let's move on. There are so many detours that one can head off on, but that's what that's there for. So then we come to this, and this is a point that I mean, I could write a separate blog on this altogether, but it's relevant because this guy, Sir James Ratcliffe, who's supposedly Britain's richest man, is moving to Monaco. I was interested to find out, well, okay, is he a self-made entrepreneur? Did he invent something and then build up? Like James Dyson, for instance, who also criticised for similar things, but no, this guy isn't a James Dyson. Here's his firm here, Ineos, and Ineos was founded out of a management buyout from British Petroleum, which was the state oil company of Britain, etc.
That anyone who says
so that's the point about Ratcliffe, and
if I don't believe as them, I'm going to burn in hell forever and ever.
Okay, this is Respect, who is basically talking about the Rasta religion, about Haile Selassie, Ethiopia, how piety and anyone interceding between man and God is basically an imposter. And he makes a very, very good point very, very well, and I happen to agree with him. So, untangling cognitive dissonance. This grew out of a thread which was basically, there's someone called Syrian Girl, or I think it's something like that. She's based in Australia, and she was basically claiming that Zionism was a religious movement, and I think it was fairly much shown that it's actually not a religious movement at all. It is a political thing, and of course the point about that and why that's still here is that Herod, the Second Temple extension, Herod as a vassal king, also Herod's was not a religious, it was political. A very important point. Theresa May act of treason, etc. That's only very weakly related, and then you can see the general sort of flow of my last month's output as I've been getting things together. Climate comes up a lot, but Clive Spash does hit the nail on the head with this between the lines thing, and his paper from about 2010 when he was working in Australia for the Australian climate quango, basically was prevented from publishing a paper about carbon trading. We'll come back to that, but yeah, these themes and whatever these ideas are all very kind of fully explored, with all the links and all the rest of it, of the stuff that I've read, and come to these sorts of generalised sort of opinions, if you like. So here we go. Now this is on Wiki Spooks, and it's called oh no, this is on my blog, Global Economic Model of War. Very important to what we're discussing here. And Dennis Rancourt is a Canadian academic. He's a physicist, and he's talking about what Trump's sort of scorecard, the pluses and minuses, etc. And that's a blog, just for a thought leader. I was doing a bunch of stuff writing at the time about Marcel Duchamp. But anyway, that's what.
As reminds what William Blake said. He said, "Man."
Bishop Williamson, who was basically brought into the Holocaust denial kind of side of things, well, you have to watch that one yourself. And Nick Colostrum has also been pulled into that as well. But when you get into monetary reform, etc., you pretty much you'll bump into this forgery of the Elders of Zion thing fairly soon on, and you do get a lot of religious-based anti-Semitism. You also get a lot of misplaced sort of Zionism stuff, and confusing a people with its government is, you know, geopolitical mistake number one. Anyway, that's a good interview, very much worth watching. Colostrom's book is very much worth reading as well. I actually prefer, there's another book by which you'll find on my blog called The Gas Chambers of Sherlock Holmes. None of that, you know, none of this evidence actually is saying the Holocaust didn't happen. I mean, patently it did. These Jews were persecuted, and many of them were slaughtered in various unpleasant ways by the Nazis. But the mythology and religiosity surrounding it, and promoted by atheists and atheist Zionists, there is a kind of a false religion, a secular religion that has kind of grown up, which does seem to be exploited by atheists like Benjamin Netanyahu, for instance. And so the banning, the curtailment of freedom of speech, as I say, I mean, the point I made on that Twitter person about, you know, if you're white, male and all the rest of it, you know, delete your account. Take the Alison Shablis case, you know, I think she probably is an anti-Semite, but I think that the degree to which she went to jump up and down and all the rest of it, I don't think she would have gone so far if the state zealots, if you like, and zealot is a very interesting word which we'll come to in a minute when we get onto the temple stuff, don't actually do anything to diminish her arguments. And it's quite easy to deal with those arguments, and the arguments that can't be refuted still do not challenge the essential premise of, you know, a Holocaust. And there's nothing new in history in terms of converging upon a more balanced idea of exactly what did happen. And it's the same thing with climate denial. And climate denial and Holocaust denial and the way they're presented by the state are very, very similar. There's no two getting away with it. Down to the language, but also down to how research into and development of you know, data and empiricism, if you like, do get to a better understanding of exactly what happened and then preventing it, whereas a more idealistic approach doesn't help. Now, the idea between idealism and materialism in a philosophical sense, and the idea of determinism and free will, there are kind of counterintuitive positions that people take on both sides of the argument. The idea of marginalising people who have politically inconvenient things to say by using mythologies which are turned into taboo areas is well known throughout history. And so I'm not challenging the fact of the Holocaust, but what I am doing is actually saying there is also the fact of the mythologizing and the religiosity surrounding what has been dubbed Holocaustianity. And the guy that dubbed that an essay which I put on my blog, and the guy that wrote it is, I think, an anti-Semite. But that doesn't, whether he is or not, it's got nothing to do with his argument. So if you read that essay and look at it, one deals with the argument, not the person making them, and where the arguments stack up. Any rational person will say, right, okay, but what about this? What about that? What are you saying? What spurious conclusions may you then go on to be drawing? And this is the same thing I say about Tommy Robinson, and what Tommy Robinson says about Islam is that just because actually the core of his argument is actually quite correct about these rape gangs, but that does not then make him right about all the other things he says about Islam, and I think he's actually plainly wrong about a lot of those. It's just that when you make an unpopular argument, which is on the fringes, you tend to find that your support and where you have to cleave to may be from quarters which sort of drag you into grey areas you'd rather not be, but you have to put food on the table, and where the British state has obviously set out to try and bankrupt Tommy Robinson in common with what they've tried to do to various other people that they've found politically inconvenient, the cases of those things happening are manifold. And it also happened to the guy that wrote that essay about Holocaustianity, for instance, which is why this video is in the blog I did about that. Where are we? This one? Yeah, here we are. This guy's reporting from the steps of Leeds Court about the guy that wrote the essay that I'm referring to.
Simon Shepherd, once expelled.
It's this Simon Shepherd chap. But there we are. So let's push on. We did that. This is what did the Empire War Machine ever do for us? And that stems from a theme which a guy called Ryan Dawson introduced into my sort of idea sort of train, as it were, which was that World War II, without the Holocaust narrative, is just another imperial resource war. And he's right about that. That doesn't say that the Holocaust didn't happen, but what it does say is that there are aspects of the Holocaust which are convenient to that narrative, or to hiding the causes of the war. The causes of the war had absolutely nothing to do with people being Jewish or Hitler being beastly to the Jews and murdering lots of them. But it did have rather a lot to do with the rise of Germany and its organisation into a state, and its competition then, and being a competitor to the British Empire. Now, and that's something that was played out up to the First World War, through the First World War. An obscure book I'm fond of referring to is by the biographer of Oscar Wilde, and it's written during the First World War, and it compares the British oligarchy to the German nobility, and gets into a lot of the stuff that Gatto gets into when he's talking about the Prussian education system and Prussia. But from Prussia, you get to Bismarck. Eventually, you get to Kaiser Wilhelm. You also get to the British royal family and their sort of Germanic roots. Edward the Seventh, I think it was. No. Oh, which one was it now? The Victoria's son that became king. He was related to Kaiser Wilhelm. They were cousins, and they were also rivals. And then there were also the intrigues regarding the Romanovs and the Bolshevik Revolution. And we're going to come to these things now in a minute as well as another thing. And how are they relevant to the Second Temple? Well, they're not directly relevant, but they are other clear examples of geopolitical rivalries and basically stooges, political stooges, placemen, call them what you will. And you know, they're in the Bible, they're in the Torah, they're in the stories from the Quran, but they're also in all other sort of religious traditions, mythologies, etc. You know, trickeries, if you like, are you know, bewitchments. So anyway, there we are. Where are we next? There's Bishop Williamson. This is my DTube channel. Where are we? This is referred to in an article by the gentleman that this video is referring to. Oh, there's so much to get through with this stuff. This is really hard work, and we haven't even got to where I want to get to yet with respect to even starting the Second Temple stuff. World government. Okay, that's where this all ends up, and this centralisation idea. You know, where everybody ends up being a vassal pseudo-government with pseudo-democracy, answerable to, you know, basically King Herod. That's what we're really saying. Global education. This came out from a guy called Muller, who was second in command at the UN for many years. The Green Agenda. All these themes are in here in this website too. The Club of Rome. This thing here is promoted by one of the Miliband brothers. It was one of them that actually turned me on to digging a bit deeper into narratives of climate change. I heard one of them on the news when I was living in England talking about deniers, and I couldn't believe that some supposed scientific theory would reach for the language of denial, the language of The Crucible and Arthur Miller's great play, and Morality Tale, etc., on McCarthyism. So where are we? Right, and now here we are, Herod's Temple, Jesus and the Temple. Now, some really good links that I put in and already sort of quote in the blog that I did on this already, so right, I'm just going to take a break from this now because I'm getting brain fade, so let's just stop this stream there. That's end of part 1, and I'm going to have a half-hour break before I get on to this stuff. Yes, stop, please.